Hey friends, Jonathan Neal Fitness here, and today we're going to talk about one of, if not the most important topic in your health, wellness, and fitness. And that's going to be a little thing that we call spinal decompression. So the idea is this. Gravity, of course, naturally here on Earth, is always kind of pulling us down, or we could think about it as pushing down towards the center of the Earth. This means that throughout our day, for years and years, as long as you've been alive, all day, every day, gravity is pressing straight down on your body. And specifically, of course, it's pressing down on the spine. So what this causes is, over time, it causes our spine to compress together. And you may have heard, and you may have noticed even yourself, that some people, as they get older, will say things like, hey, I lost an inch or two, I got a little shorter as I got older. And a lot of this is due to the fact that over time, again, the spine that used to be this long is slowly, over decades and decades, just getting shorter and shorter. It's literally getting compressed. Now, this can happen from standing a lot, from sitting a lot, all things that we all probably do, but even just in general, it's something that happens. So what are some of the problems that can be caused by this? Well, things like when we've heard about having a bulging disc or about herniated discs are generally, unless there's some kind of external force, you got hit by something, if it's something that just develops over time, that's really probably a product of spinal compression. So basically, if you think about it, if you have your two vertebral discs here, or you have your two, we should say vertebrae, and then in between is the vertebral disc, and if that gets compressed, and specifically if it gets compressed on one side more than other, let's say we are hunching forward, so it gets squeezed, and then that disc starts to get squeezed out the back, or, if I have an excessive arch at my lumbar, the disc can start to get squeezed out the front. Either way, it's a sort of what I like to call a sloppy Joe effect. As we squish that sandwich, all the filling starts to kind of burst out. Now the problem is that the filling of this sandwich is, again, your vertebral discs, and that can cause a whole bunch of problems, and that can cause an enormous amount of pain and discomfort, and it can really limit your ability to engage in things like exercise, because if your back is hurt or any part of your spine is hurt, even if it's the neck or cervical spine or thoracic, you're going to end up with these problems. You're going to end up with a lot of pain and a lot of lack of mobility. So the real question here in this series that I want to do for you guys here on spinal decompression is, what can I do about that? How can I help myself to not incur these damages and these problems that come along with that? It's kind of a natural thing, time compresses, but we have that ability to do something about it. So what are we going to do about it? Well, there's many things that we can do to facilitate an opening or a decompression of the spine. For today's video, this being the first one in the series, I just want to introduce you to some pretty simple concepts, and then I'm going to give you one kind of simple, we could call it an exercise, that you can do and you can start doing now, just so you can start to get an idea of this, and then we'll go deeper as we go into the series. So the first thing I'd like to bring up here, our Exhibit A, is going to be our old friend from, at least some of us remember this time. There was something that we called the slinky. So I got here a little slinky. I got a nice blue shiny one because I like blue and I want it to be a little exciting. But the main component that we want to look at here is not how shiny, not how pretty this slinky is, but what it does. And this is really what we're looking at. So if we imagine this slinky as being your spine, let's say, what's happening is that we start off with this sort of a spine. There's plenty of space in between the vertebrae. When we move around, you can see that those little components, we can call them vertebrae, don't really touch each other because there's plenty of space in between. They don't crush the space in between. They don't get that sloppy Joe effect. Now what happens over time is, again, this starts to compress, and then when it moves around, there's more chance that those things sort of push together or compress those vertebral discs again. What also can happen, if we notice in the slinky, is that we might be really nice and still open here, but then up at the top we have a lot of compression. Down at the bottom we have a lot of compression. And this is actually what's very, very common in people, is that we tend to be okay in that thoracic spine, the area around the ribs and the chest and the upper back. What tends to happen is the compression tends to build up down at the lumbar and here at the cervical or at the neck. So basically lower back and the neck are what tends to get compressed. These two areas are much more mobile areas of the spine, which means that they obviously can move better. We can move through our neck better than we can through our thoracic spine. We can move that lumbar spine really well, but that also makes them susceptible to this compression because they're more mobile, therefore they can be moved easier. And that means they can be compressed easier. So that's really what we want to focus on, is how am I going to get expansion? How am I going to get decompression specifically in the lumbar and the cervical? And what I've found is that if you get those two areas open, it's kind of like taking a piece of rope or string. If we just pull it long from the two ends, then the whole thing gets taut, the whole thing gets straight, the whole thing gets open. So that's what we're going to look at today. Now, again, the real question, now that we know some stuff about what spinal compression and decompression is how am I going to get some decompression through my spine? So what I've done is I've gone ahead and I'll bring Exhibit B here, which is this handy little drawing I've made. Now, poor artistry aside, let's look at the actual technical aspect of what we're looking at here. So obviously, well, perhaps not obviously, but this is generally a human form. And I want you to imagine that this is what we call a posterior view. You're looking at the backside of a person. So this would be the back of the head. These two little green spots, these little green triangles, are going to be representative of your scapula, your shoulder blades. This little dot down here is going to be your sacrum and your coccyx, your tailbone and your sacrum. And then these little curved lines right here are going to be the shape of your hip bones in the back. And then we got all of our little, again, lumbar and cervical vertebrae going on right here. So the other thing that you'll notice on this chart, besides the black and the green, are these blue and red things. We've got a couple dots here and a couple arrows. And that's really going to be the exercise that I want you to start practicing now. I like to call them basically our upper triangle, and then we have the lower triangle. And what we're essentially trying to do is feel those two triangles expanding out in all directions. So we can think, you can see here that I've got a little blue dot here, a little blue dot here, and a little one here, and we see that those are moving away. So what essentially we're trying to do is take ourselves from this kind of position where my shoulders and my head are crunching together. We're at our computer here, and then we're trying to expand those 3 points out. So what you'll notice is that in many cases, a lot of people will tell you to kind of pinch your shoulder blades together. That is not what we're trying to do here. What we really want is if you see this little green line up here, that's kind of, if you reach on the back of your head, you'll find there's a little notch at the back of the skull. I like to just kind of imagine that you're just gently pulling up from there. That area is lifting up so that we don't do this, because that's going to compress again. We want to lift from the back of the head as the chin comes in. So that's going up while the chin again draws in. Not a hang of the head, but a pull in as we lift from back here. And then the other actions that are happening are that essentially we're thinking about the 2 points of the shoulders moving down and away. So not pinching back so that we're stuck in a pinch instead of around. We want to feel them expanding. Now what we'll feel again, what we're trying to actually feel, of course, is decompression through the cervical. So you want to feel your neck, your vertebrae in your neck, all these little guys right here actually getting longer. We want to feel them doing this. So if you feel more pinch or more compression while you're doing this, that means that we're moving in the wrong way somewhere. But really, the easiest thing for me is I just imagine this triangle between point 1, 2, and 3, and I just feel it essentially expanding out, up, and to the side. So we might even feel our shoulder blades, these green guys right here, kind of moving a little bit down, still going down, but now a little bit more apart instead of the kind of classic pinch them together. Now what you notice there, and so that, again, that's going to be for the cervical spine. That's really step one. We want to get that nice and open. And these two things you'll feel actually go together. Once you feel one, once you feel the other, you'll notice that in the same way they tend to impinge together, they tend to want to open together. But that being said, let's focus a little bit on that lower triangle now. So again, we got our tailbone here, we got our two hip bones here, and then we got our spine right here. So essentially what we're trying to feel is the same idea, but just in the lower body now. So I feel as if these 2 points, essentially feeling that back ridge of the hip bone, sort of move down. And essentially what we're trying to do, if you feel this just right, you'll get a pretty good engagement through the glutes. Now what I don't want you to do is try to squeeze your glutes. What I do want you to do is be mindful as you do this action of if you start to feel some gluteal activity. That's a good sign. If we start to feel the glutes engage, that means we're putting pressure on the glute instead of compression on the lumbar. Because as I always say, something has to hold you upright, and if the glutes and the abdominals, which we're going to be engaging through this as well, specifically the transversus abdominis, are not holding you up, if they're not strong and they're not doing that job, it will fall on things like your lumbar spine to compress and essentially hold you up through compression. Not a good idea. So we want to feel these two things expanding down and out, and the glute contraction, even if it's just a little bit of gluteal activity, is a good sign that you're on the right direction. At the same time, we do want to feel a little bit of lift up from here so that we're actively, again, as we pull, as those two bottom points move out, they're going to start to pull the bottom part of that spine, and then just a little bit of reaching up through the spot just above the lumbar, like right where we're about to turn into the thoracic spine. We want to feel that gently moving up, but the main action in the bottom triangle, we want to focus more on those down and away and getting that gluteal activity. Now, as I said, if you do this just right, and this is kind of your benchmark, is that if I'm doing it correctly, I will feel the gluteal activity, and then as I lengthen up, I will also probably feel a sort of drawing in of the abdominals. But again, I stress here, what I do not want you to do is I do not want you to try to engage your core. You're not in your abs, and you're not trying to squeeze your butt. You're expanding this triangle and using those more as benchmarks for whether or not you're doing the right thing. And again, we always come back to our little slinky here, that whether it's the upper triangle or the lower triangle, what we want to feel is expansion and ease. If you feel any compression happening there, if you feel like I'm moving but I'm actually getting more pinch or more compression, then we know that something's off and we need to work on that. So that's really what I want you to start, even just feeling this, getting the concept. Now, we're going to get more into other things like how you're going to release some of these tissues that are going to allow this to happen better, how we're going to engage other areas of the body so we can allow this to happen. So if you have a struggle feeling these things, don't worry. We're going to address that through some myofascial release in a later video. But for now, just start to get an idea of this. Start to feel that upper triangle expand, start to feel that lower triangle expand, especially in a standing position. The last thing I'll say about this is while you do this, make sure you're not holding your breath. It's very common as we're mentally focusing on all these different body parts and trying to get them to move in certain ways that we sometimes forget to breathe. Very hard for your body to really realign and to find better alignment and to reaffirm itself in a new position if we're holding our breath. It causes a lot of nervous disruption. So anyway, all that being said, let's concentrate on feeling those two triangles expand, the upper triangle, the lower triangle, and really trying to feel those things, that decompression happening through that cervical spine and then with the lower triangle through the lumbar. So put this into practice, and please feel free to let me know down below if you have any success with this, if you can feel it, or if you have any struggle with it, and I'll be able to help you with that so that you can get all these insanely important benefits of that spinal decompression. So again, this has been Jonathan Neal Fitness, and I do appreciate you watching this. What I would appreciate even more is if you put it into practice and got that result. If you have any comments you would like to leave, you can leave them at the bottom. If you like this kind of content, please like it. If you'd like to continue to take this decompression journey and to get other great content, please go ahead and feel free to subscribe down below. And this has been Jonathan Neal Fitness, and I appreciate you watching. Have a wonderful day or night wherever you are. Take care and be well.